So namaste everyone, I'm Damodar Lohani, currently working with Flutter and Flutter tools. I've been working with Flutter for quite some time now. It's been almost 2 years that I'm working with Flutter. Let's begin with Flutter state management with Riverpod. So the first thing I'd like to say is before moving on to state management with Flutter, I'd like to share some of my experience, share some of my tips becoming a good developer. So some of you who have joined here might be a beginner developer who are starting in the development, who have just graduated and would like to become a good developer, good mobile or backend or anything, but you want to become a good developer. So I'd like to share some of my tips that have helped me in my beginning days. So first thing is you need to learn the right tools. So learning to code is not only enough. Knowing to code or just knowing how to write codes in your own language is not enough. You have to learn other tools like Git, command line, GitHub, and so many things out there like Bitbucket and Jira and so many things that assist you in writing tools. Maybe some automation tools like automation in Bash script or Python or anything. But you have to learn more tools. The more tools you have in your toolbox, more good codes you'll be able to write, more time you'll be able to spend on those tools, refining those things. Okay, that's the first thing. And next is never never feel embarrassed to admit what you don't know, and never stop learning and asking questions. Always feel free to ask a question, because in the community there are so many great people that are always ready to help, like I mentioned. So when I was making tutorial for Upright with Flutter, I had lots of problems. So I asked Vital that he was so open and so ready to help that I learned a lot about Upright and as well as the overall architecture, overall purpose of Upright, so much from him that I'm really thankful to him. So there are so many such great people in the community that you can learn from. So never feel embarrassed, just ask for the guidance. And next thing is working together in team has something that is not available while working alone. So I was a lone worker for quite some time in my beginning days of my career. But later I found some friends from my college who were ready to work together with me. So together we worked on various different projects. So that was quite a learning experience. And even better, if you can find a working team where people are better than you, where people are senior than you, from whom you can learn a lot. So that's another important thing. And next is share what you are learning and working on. So sharing is also another important aspect of learning. Once you share something, people will start to comment, people will start to give feedback, people will start to like or dislike your sharings. It doesn't matter even if people hate what you are doing, but the main thing to remember is you are doing it continuously, you are sharing it with people. So I'd like to share some my experience. So one of my starting project in Flutter was the Flutter UI Challenge project, which is now live in web, mobile, Play Store and App Store, more than 30,000 downloads. So in the beginning, I just used to share the UI I created using Flutter in my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere. And in fact, that is the thing that landed me my first Flutter project. So just by looking at those designs and those work that I was posting in social network, somebody was able to offer me, trust me enough to offer me a job. And that was only after I was starting or doing Flutter for 1.5 months around. So that was a great opportunity. So share what you are learning, working. That's another. And finally, teach others, help others learn. So the final stage of learning, I believe, is teaching. So once you start teaching, you learn so many new things that you previously did not learn. And the next thing will be, once you start to help others, so if you are working on a project alone, you only encounter few problems. But if you start helping others, they have so many different problems, so many different errors that you get to learn and get to solve those errors. And you learn a lot from solving those errors and problems. So these are my tips for becoming a good developer. So if you don't like, or if you have any comments, if you have more tips, do share in the chat as Jay suggested, so I might include them in my future talks. So thank you for this. Next, now I'd like to move on to my topic. So state management. So what is state and state management? Before moving on to state and state management, what I'd like to talk about is what is an application, not only mobile application, but any application, desktop application or web application. So what is an application? An application is something that allows user to do something. Okay, an application is a software that allows users to do something, and that something might help user to solve their problem or keep a record or anything. That might be anything. But what I'm trying to tell here is an app is not a static thing. App is dynamic, it's interactive. So always users are interacting with your application and they are getting some feedback. So what is happening there is your application has a state. It is something that is presented using a UI, but the state is something that is holded in the data and overall architecture of your application. So state is the current data and current UI of your application or current user interaction that is happening in your UI or happening in your application. So state is one current state of your application. So next thing is state is bound to change. So whenever user interact with your application, your state will change. So if a user clicks on a button, you have to show something, you have to move to the next page, or you have to open a dialog, or you have to give some feedback or anything that might be, but your state will change. So for example, we have a login application and a login screen is presented to the user. So this is the current state of the application. There is a login screen, right? And once the user enters the username and password and taps the sign in button, what you are supposed to do, you are supposed to verify the email address and password provided by the user and log in the user if they are authenticated and move them to the different page. So your application state changes from one state where user is on login page to the next stage where the user is already logged in. So this is the state of application. And why we need state management? Because applications are huge and they have lots of state, right? So I'm just talking about login application. It has few states like first time the login screen is shown. Next time when they enter data and press the login button, maybe you show some processing. So that is the processing state. And sometimes if the password is incorrect, there is error state. And if authentication is correct, they are moved to the next page, that is another state. So there are lots of state and lots of data being shared in the application. So what happens is once your application grows from one page to multiple pages, you need some kind of solution to manage your state, because your data or state of your application is somewhere in one place and you need to share it overall in your application in multiple pages, multiple places. So you need some kind of state management techniques or state management architecture in order to be able to properly handle those data changes. So whenever user change one data in one screen and they move to another screen, if they are consuming the same data in that next screen, then they must be able to see the recent data or latest data in that screen as well. So that is why we need something to manage our state. So that's that. And finally, why Riverpod? Why I'm talking about Riverpod? So before talking about Riverpod, I'd like to say something, that is Flutter has lots of different state management solution like getX and Flutter command recently released Flutter command block and even scoped module. And the basic one is stateful widget that is provided by the Flutter itself. So what I'd like to say, if you have just one page in your application and a very simple state of your application, you can just use one stateful widget that will manage the state of your application, and that's done. Sorry. But once you move beyond that, once you have multiple pages and go beyond that, you need to choose one of the state management. And I'm not saying Riverpod or provider is the best one. You can try it yourself. You can try the multiple options and stick with stick with whichever one you like best. So first, I am still working with provider. The provider and Riverpod are like, even if you hear the name, they are same. Riverpod is just the opposite of provider somewhat, and it is developed by the same developer, Remy. I'm very thankful to him for such a great products. He's a great contributor in Flutter open source community, and Riverpod and provider are from same developer. And as the developer puts it, why he developed Riverpod after provider is there were some limitations with provider, and updating provider to cover those limitations was not enough or was not possible enough, so that he built a entirely new state management package. And Riverpod is still in experimental stage, getting to stable state quite soon, I guess. But first, why I'm choosing Riverpod is, one, it's from the developer of provider and it's similar to provider, and I have been actively using provider for quite some time now. And I have tried Block, and recently Block developer of Block also have released Qubit. You can try those, but I'm sticking with provider. So I'm trying Riverpod because it is from the same developer and it's an improved version of provider. So now I'll move on to demo. I'll show you code how the Riverpod works in general, and I'll not be writing the code like a tutorial. I'll just be demoing you the pre-written code and running application, so that you'll have idea how it is implemented and what benefits we have apart from a provider. What benefits does it provide? And also, I'd like to mention there is a great talk from the developer himself, from Remy. I think during Flutter London meetup or so in the YouTube. I'll provide the link in the in my social network. You can find it there, and he has like a great presentation there why he created Riverpod and what it solves that provider could not solve. So let's move on to the demo. Okay, so I hope my code is visible enough for you to see it. If not, I can zoom in one more step. So let me know if it is not visible. I'll continue. So here I have a simple, sorry, yes.
So can you zoom just a bit more larger?
Okay, one step. I zoomed in.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a simple application here. Let me just expand this a little bit. It's a very simple application. So here is an analog clock, and it is showing my current time zone and current time here. And I have some feature here to add new clock instance. So what this is this is a world clock. You can add clock for different time zones here and interactively see the time of each time zone in this clock. But this is a simple app. It uses World Time API. It's an open API. You can use it. I'll show you the API in a bit. And first thing to remember is, first to get started with Riverpod, you just need to add the Flutter Riverpod. And let me tell you one thing. There is also another version of Riverpod, that is Hooks Riverpod, and yet another only Riverpod. So you'll use only Riverpod if you are using it in Dart project, not Flutter projects. And with Flutter projects, if you are using Flutter hooks, you can use Hooks Riverpod. If you are not using hooks, then you can use Flutter Riverpod like I'm using here. And I'm not using hooks because it can be quite confusing topic for beginner developers. So hook was quite confusing for me when I started with Flutter hooks. So sorry, I believe it is quite confusing for beginner developers. So I have not used it here. I'm just using plain old Riverpod. And here I'm adding HTTP package just to query the old time API, and Intel package for just formatting this date and times, and state notifier to use along with Riverpod. I'll show you in a bit. Drop-down search just for presenting this drop-down that has a searching capability. I'll show you the code also in a bit. And equitable, this is just for overriding the equality operator in your custom classes. So if you write a custom class, you have to override equality operator and you have to define hash codes and everything yourself. But this equitable class makes it a lot simpler. So let me get on with the code now. Once you add the dependency in your project, next thing you need to do is Flutter pop get, or Visual Studio Code does it automatically. I think Android Studio 2 does it automatically. And next thing is, in the main, first thing you need to provide is provider scope. And it's better to always provide it before you add material app, so that this provider scope is available everywhere in your application, no matter where you navigate, on which page you are. So it's better to provide in the top level. And provider scope does everything. It like it creates the state and it allows us to access to the step also in a bit. So here I have a simple material app, and this is just a theming, and home is a clock page that I'll show now, and some routes route setup here using on generate route. So now moving on to clock space. So these are all the imports there. I'll show the provider. Okay. So very simple provider, the time provider. Okay. And it uses state provider. Okay. From Riverpod. If you can see here from package Riverpod. Let me keep this up. So from package Riverpod, we are using state provider to just provide a simple value. And one of the thing I'd like to mention here, provider used to work with types, data types. So in a provider, if you provide two different data of string, so you provide one string and again using the provider you provide another string, you could only retrieve last string that you provided, because provider uses the type class or type to get the provided value. But instead of that, Riverpod uses this variable. So we are using this global variable to access our state, so we can provide several values of same data type with Riverpod without any problem, and it's able to determine which value we are trying to access. So this is the time provider. Here it's simple to create a provider. So time provider equals state provider. It's a type of date time, and it's a function that provides us with provider reference, which we are not using at the moment. That's fine. And here we are just returning the current date and time. So date and time of the current moment. Next, how to use that? So I'm creating a stateful widget here, clock page, and here I have a timer. The timer is here just to run this clock every second. So a timer dot periodic duration 1 second. So every second this timer runs and performs this operation every second. And here I'm accessing this time provider. So I define the time provider there, and down here from context. So this uses Dart extension. If you don't know about that, you can search it in Google. Dart extension is something that allows us to define extra method in already available classes. So there is a context.read method. Okay, and in the read method we'll provide our provider, time provider, and dot state. So this reads the current state of our time provider. And what we are doing, we are adding 1 second to the current state. So again, we are reading the current state and add duration seconds 1. So every second we are adding 1 second to our provider, and that provider is automatically changing the state and our clock is running. Also how? So in order for this clock to change every second, what I have done here is I'm using a consumer widget. All right. So this is a consumer widget that gives us with context and a watch function. And down here, I'm using this watch function to watch the state of our time provider. So this is the same time provider we have defined above, and we are watching the time provider state. And after we watch that, we are returning a column here, just these all designs. So what we have inside a column, this is the clock container with custom paint for this clock hands and everything, and I'm passing the time here so that this time comes from this state, and every time this state changes, this clock hands is rebuilt, or everything inside this consumer is rebuilt, and we are seeing that our clock hand is moving, seconds hand is moving, minutes hand is moving. So every time changes. What I can do here is, if I freeze this, let's say if I stop this timer and hot restart, so now the clock is stopped moving because we are not changing our state. Even if we are watching our state here we are watching our state, but our state does not change. So with this timer, I'm changing the state, and every time the state changes, the watch is rebuilt, UI is rebuilt itself, and we can see the time moving in every second. So this is what state management does. So every time your state changes, it automatically rebuilds any widgets or any code that is watching the state. So next I'd like to show this page, select time zone page. Time zones page. Up here, I'm using state notifier provider, and that is time zones provider. Okay, and this time zones provider I have defined here. So it is a list of time zones for custom clocks that I can add here. First, let me show you the demo. Let me add New York time. So let me select this, add. Now you can see the New York time down here, and I'll show you something. So here I'm just showing minutes, hour and minutes, so it is not changing. Let me add the seconds here. Let me find the code. Okay, so time JM. So here let me add JMS so that now seconds is visible. So even this clock is changing every second because I'm using the same timer, and I'm using same timer to calculate this time of this below clock using the offset provided by the time zone old time API. So first let's go to time zones notifier. So what is time zones notifier? It is just a list of these time zone objects that I'm getting from old time API. So here, if you can see in the init state, I'm getting list of time zones or simply empty object. So initially the state will return any value I'm getting from get time zones. So this time zones is what we are getting from old time API, oldtimeapi.org/API/time zone. So this will provide us with this list of time zones here that we can use. So moving back, in the not in the clock space, but time zone space. So here is the time zones provider that provides us with the list of time zones from our old time API, and I'm using this down here. So consumer, again here I am watching the time zone provider state. So see the difference. This we are using simple value provider using state provider. So while watching or reading, what we are doing is inside the watch we only have time provider and dot state is outside, but instead here we are using the state notifier provider. So inside watch we are watching the state of the state notifier provider instead of outside here. So initially we are watching the time zones provided by our time zone API, and finally time zones, if time zones is null, will not return the column, will simply return empty box. Okay, but if time zones is not null, then here the drop down search plugin that I was using. So I'm using the drop down search plugin and I'm passing in the value of time zones so that it is listed here and I can search even here. like this. Okay. So let me add Singapore and press add. Again, new clock is added here and it runs together with this. So finally, let me show you how this is constructed. So main.dart, sorry, clock space here. This is the clock time provider. Next, here is the another consumer that gets the list of clock from clocks provider. So this clocks provider is again another state notifier provider. That is the list of this time info object, and that is what is created while I add the new clock from here. So when I add new clock from here, a time info object with all these details that I get from old time API is created, and that is inserted in this clock's notifier state, okay, here, and we can watch this state. So here we are watching this state, and sorry, not time provider. Here we are watching this state that gives us the list of time info, that is our clocks, and I'm using that clocks to show the different list of clocks down here using list view.builder, and this is what is showing this clock here by watching that state. So every time I add a new clock, it gets automatically rebuilt and I see a new clock here. And let's say if I tap this cross button, it just removes that clock so that that clock is gone. So this is how simple it is to use Riverpod to manage the state of your application. You can see that your state is defined anywhere. Wherever it is defined, you can access it from any page. And next thing I'd like to add that we have been hearing from the beginning of our coding days that global variables are bad. So changing the global variables creates lots of issues. So you might think that Riverpod, why does it use global variable? It's not good for state management. So what I'd like to add here is, so here this global variable is not your state. This is just your state provider. So where is the state of your application? So your state of application is stored in this provider scope, so that it is not a global variable, it is accessed through context. So it is only accessed through context here. From context we are reading the state, from context we are watching the state, so that we are not using the global variable to directly change the state itself. So it is safe that we are not using global variable in the sense of sharing data or sharing the values in the application. So this is all for the presentation. So that's the demo. So I'd like to move on to query.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question. So what is the difference between block pattern, BLOC pattern, and state management?
Okay, block pattern and state management. So I believe it's not the difference between block pattern and state management, rather, but block pattern and Riverpod, I guess. So block pattern and state management is similar, because block pattern is one type of state management technique in Flutter. So block uses streams. So block uses streams a lot, and it provides the abstraction over streams to use state management. It uses some kinds of things like event pattern, event and outcome of events, like that thing. I have not used block so much. I just tried it I think a year back. So it had changed a lot since then. But as in the beginning, as I said in the beginning, just try different kind of solutions available there. Try it and stick with the most intuitive one. So whichever you feel most talks to you. So for me, provider and Riverpod speaks best, because I like the synchronous approach. So with streams, I believe, for me personally, I believe streams adds a lot of complexity even to the simple things like getting a value. So streams has things like sinks and adding to sink, getting from sink. But I'd like to add more because block is an abstraction over a stream. It doesn't directly let you interact with the stream, but rather you interact with block pattern. So it has some added benefits there. So they have difference in the sense Riverpod and block are different because they use different technique. Like I showed you, Riverpod uses provider and global variable to manage your state and provide you with really simple methods to access your state like context.read, context.watch, consumer watch, so that kind of thing. Whereas with block, I think there are some block builders and so many things there. I'm not sure of the actual API of the block and Qubit. There is also Qubit from the same developer. So my decision is, so my suggestion to you is try the both, try Riverpod, try provider, try block, even try getax and Flutter commands so that you can find the one that is suitable for you and for your application. So there is also React like Redux also. So try everything and stick with the one that you feel that is most intuitive and easier for you to understand and grasp. For me, using block or using provider has its own benefits and has its own cons, pros and cons, but I've been doing provider for some time now in fully production app. We have quite a few production apps with provider with Flutter, and I'm very happy with that. I think Riverpod is also going to do great, so you can try it and decide it for yourself. Thank you.
Okay, so that's nice. And so can you say something about the animation in the Flutter and what is the scope model?
Scope model, sorry.
Yeah, so the animation in the Flutter. So it is possible. So how to miss animate
Yeah, yeah.
the things in the Flutter?
Okay, okay. So animation, so Flutter from the starting has focused on the things like it is a great UI toolkit. So Flutter is a UI toolkit. So UI means presenting the UI in most best possible way so that there are lots of options for animating in Flutter. So Flutter is great in performance in the sense it provides 60 FPS. So Flutter has from the beginning been focused on performance and beautiful UI. So animation, they have invested a lot in animations and animation APIs in Flutter. Some of them are really simple, like in implicit animations and explicit animations. So implicit animations are the really simple ones. You can just use a simple widget in a stateful widget, simple implicit animation widget inside your stateful widget, and whenever you change the state, the animation occurs itself. It is handled by the implicit widget. You don't have to do anything, but the limitations of that is you cannot control the animation, when to trigger the animation or if you want to repeat the animation. But there is another solution that is explicit, with which you can use the animation controller. You can control the each and every step of your animation. You can provide how long the animation can occur, how much step, when the animation occurs, if you want to reverse the animation, if you want to repeat the animation. So that is there. And recently I have found one awesome animation package. So you can check in pop.dev animator. There is a package called ANI Amateur Animator, and it is a really simple, really great animation tool, animation package that supports both implicit and explicit animation, and it has really simple API. So I have a YouTube video on that coming soon, so watch out for that as well. So that's my take on animation in Flutter. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll be taking only two questions. So thus, as Flutter is in a hype for mobile application, so in the market there is Angular also, React also. So basically, what is the difference from them? So it is far better in the Flutter making the mobile application, or those framework is better. So
So
quite overview on this.
yeah. So I'd just like to share my personal preference. So before Flutter, I was doing, I tried Ionic, then I was doing React Native. So there are lots of other frameworks like Xamarin, Ionic, React Native. I think Angular native. There are other frameworks too which I don't know of to build the application. So finally, there is also native side that you can use to build a native application. So few things I found with Flutter. After I started Flutter, I completely left React Native. So few things I found was, first thing, performance is really great, but not talking in the sense if you have just one page application, maybe React Native and Flutter might have same performance, even React Native might have better, I don't know at the moment, because React Native has evolved since I have left, so it has evolved a lot as well. But with Flutter, there are a few things that I like. One is the performance, yes, that is obviously. And next is the native. So Flutter, even the UI code is transpiled, everything is transpiled to native code. So it is compiled to ARM code before running in the, or while building, so that in mobile application, it is just running the compiled code. That is next benefit. And another benefit, so mostly I stuck with Flutter after leaving React Native, is because it is so intuitive that once you get started with it, you will not be able to switch back to React Native, or I have not tried any other. I have just tried React Native and Ionic. So for me, Flutter is far better because its overall ecosystem that it provides. So in React Native, if I had to set up, say, the navigation drawer or a simple animation, I had to write lots of HTML code, JavaScript code, and so on. It was so difficult. And say for implementing a native plugin in React Native, it was a tedious task. You had to add a package, sometimes you have to link it, sometimes you might mess things up. So after starting with Flutter, it was really easy. So even now, Flutter has gone beyond mobile with desktop and web. Even though it supports desktop and web, adding plugins and getting your app support for desktop web is really simple, really intuitive. You don't have too much to do on native side, so that just adding a package in pub.dev is enough. Sometime in your pub-spec.yaml is enough. Sometimes you might need to write some native code, but documentations and community support is so great that overall ecosystem of Flutter is a huge bonus. So also next thing, it took me almost 3 or 4 days to completely set up and run React Native, but with Flutter I was ready in 2 or 3 hours. I was ready to start a project. So that's the next best thing for developers. So being a developer, what I want is the tool I'm using is so intuitive that I don't have to focus too much time on tools, so that I can focus on my application development. So that is what my experience have been with Flutter. And yeah, I'm still using some other frameworks like React for web, because Flutter for web is not still in production, it's still in beta. So I think there are other awesome frameworks as well, but try it yourself. So just instead of taking my opinion, try it yourself. Try to install React Native and try to install Flutter and try it. So you might find the difference yourself. Thank you.
Okay, that's nice. So we have a last question. So that the first thing which you have told about, so the motivation for the student, that what are the qualities the developer should need it. So as a beginner, so what are the different type of project should a beginner should do? So any suggestion on that?
Okay, so as a beginner, first I'll talk only about Flutter. So as a beginner in Flutter, what kind of project you should do in Flutter? I'll talk about my journey. So I started in Flutter just by developing UIs. So I started in Flutter. It's really easy to develop UI without any application logic, just coding the UI, login screen, profile screen, anything with predefined data sets. So that's the easiest thing to do in Flutter. So start with that, and after that move on to really simple applications. So I followed some tutorials. I developed applications like unit converter, and applications like getting a simple data from HTTP request and just displaying it in a list view, and then tapping and going to detail view. So those kind of stuff. But once you move beyond that, once you know the basics and foundation, and I'd like to emphasize here, getting the foundation right is very important. So if you don't have programming knowledge, you are just starting with Flutter, I'd like to suggest you, so have the fundamentals right, get some knowledge on fundamentals of programming, like the concept of programming, like variables, loops, constant, and conditionals, those kind of things. First, have a grasp on those things, because that is used everywhere. Even if you go to back end, front end, if you write Python, if you write JavaScript, anywhere you write, the fundamental logic is the same. Only thing changes is the syntax and the platform that you are working on. So get those things right, and after that move on to projects like to-do list and e-commerce projects. Simple e-commerce shopping cart might be enough. Adding a product, removing a product from shopping cart, calculating the total, maybe delivery charges, those kind of things. Then move on to next thing, like in Flutter, in the sense of Flutter, move on to next thing like adding native dependencies, like accessing camera, accessing microphone, maybe recording a sound, recording a video, or sharing with other applications, like sharing a data from your application to Flutter, those kind of things. And then move on to more complex, like build a complete project from start to finish using backend tools like integrating with Firebase or even AppWrite itself. So those kind of things. And also in the motivation for being a good developer, how to become a developer, I have already presented in the beginning as well. So stick to things that learn. The more you practice, more you share, and more you help others, you learn more. So keep on working, keep on sharing, and keep on adding more to your tools. So don't stick to just one technology. I use Flutter, I use React, I used to work on WordPress and PHP. I have a strong foundation with programming now, that if I have to switch to any programming language, I can pick it up really fast. So invest on those founding tools, also in tools like Git and GitHub, learning to use them. And for me personally, I believe learning to use Linux and command line is best for the developers, and even more required for web developers, because mostly in hosting websites, web servers are mostly deployed in Linux. I'm not saying not only in Linux, but mostly in Linux, because it's open source and cost effective. So invest on those tools apart from coding, and invest on improving yourself. Not only that, but improve your personal self, like your determination, your learning skill, and those kind of things. So I think in the long run, that will provide the huge benefit. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a nice tip. So yeah, and moreover, one suggestion also I want to give is that if you are from if you are means if you want to do a backend, so learn the CRUD operation, insert, update, delete. So learn the statement of insert, update, delete. CRUD operation is also one of the important for the student. So because mostly the student learn the front end, and they just ignore the back end part all day. So means if you want to be a complete software engineer, so just learn the back end as well as the front end. And one more thing is the CRUD operation is necessary. So that is the thing. Okay, thank you. So yeah, it was a nice presentation, and hopefully the attendee has gained lots of information about the state management in the Flutter. Yeah, and lastly, if you want to tell anything for the attendee.
Yeah, so thank you, Jay, for this wonderful opportunity, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'd like to tell one thing is, if you are joining here, if you are listening to me, so you are already one step ahead in your learning process. So if you are interested enough to hear someone's presentation, that is first step in learning. And final stage will be like giving a presentation and always learning, uh, trying, always trying to learn and always trying to share. I believe that will be the final stage of learning. So keep it up, and thank you, everyone.